So for this module, we are going to be moving the dart. So this is your basic thing that you need to know how to do with pattern making, is how to move a dart. So remember, as long as the dart is pointing towards a bust point, or just the apex of wherever, it can originate from any point in the pattern. So as long as this dart point is pointing at the bust point, it could come from here down to the bottom, it could come from the side seam, it could come from the armhole, the shoulder, the neckline, even from center front. It can come from any of those directions. So how I'm going to move this is what I'm going to show you. So what I've done is, before I started, I just traced over my block, and then I added my seam allowance, so you don't have to watch me add my seam allowance. I added my seam allowance everywhere. Since this is a half size, I added a 1/4 inch, which will represent a 1/2 inch in full size. I made sure that I kept all of my notches. I went ahead and just labeled it with my style number, my style name, the name of the piece, the size, how many I need of it, and a number of the pattern piece. So, as well as I gave myself my grain line, which is those 3 little dots indicating that this line will be a fold, as well as my grain line. As long as I have those 3 little dots, I don't need to draw my grain line in with an arrow, because my grain line is there. But I've also labeled center front. So once I've got to this point, you can start by doing this, or you can add all those details at the end. But I figured I would add them now so you don't have to think about it midway through the video. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this dart, and I want half of this dart to go over to the side. I could move the full dart over there, but for this particular project, I would like you to develop a 2-dart block. At the end, you can certainly transfer it over to more hard paper so that you have a 2-dart block as well, which will be really useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this dart about 1 inch down, part of this dart 1 inch down from the side seam. And I measured from the seam allowance, the seam line. We don't pay attention to seam allowances when we're making alterations. We always pay attention to the sew line. And I'm just going to draw a line between my bust point and the side there. I'm going to take my X-Acto blade, and I'm going to cut from the bust point down to the dart point and down one of the legs of the dart. I'm also going to cut down the line that I want the dart to go into. So that it can move like this. But I've left a teeny tiny bit of paper right there as a hinge so that it can stay attached. If it breaks, that's fine, you can just tape it back on. Not a big deal. So I want half of this dart to come over here. So I'm going to measure the dart opening down here to indicate, find out how wide it is. So mine is 2.5, which means that 1 1/4 inches needs to go away. So I'm going to measure over 1 1/4 inches, basically right at the middle of the dart. I'm going to figure out where that point is. And then I'm just going to slowly pivot the dart closed until it matches that line. Once it hits that line, I can come in and tape it. Now, half the dart is up here and half the dart is down here. All I have to do now to complete this is back the dart points away from the bust point to make sure that they look good, perfect the darts, which just means to make the points at the bottom and the side pretty so that it's easy to sew, and it'll be done. So to do that, first what I'm going to do is fill in any little gaps that I have. So I've got this gap right here. I'm just going to come in here, put some paper in, and tape it shut. Don't be afraid to use lots of tape. We don't want pattern pieces to move. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the midpoint at the bottom of each of the darts. So there's 1 1/4 inches, 1 I'm going to find the halfway point and I'm going to draw a line from the bust point down through the middle of the dart. The next thing I'm going to do is find the middle of this dart over here, which when you close it might end up being a little bit smaller than this dart just because of the distance that it is away from the bust point. But half the dart did go, even if the opening here is smaller than over here. Draw a line down the middle. And I want to back these away from the bust point 1/2 inch. So just down that line from the bust point, I'm going to mark a point 1/2 inch away, which means in real life, like full size version of this, I'd be moving that away 1 inch. And from that point, I am going to redraw in my dart legs. I'm also going to come back and make little tiny hashes, marking out the area lines that I no longer need. So that if anybody else comes along and looks at this pattern, they know that those lines are no longer important. The final step for perfecting the dart is I'm going to fold whatever direction I want my fabric to fold when I'm sewing. I'm going to fold that leg first. So I'm going to fold the leg closest to center front up to the dart point, and then I'm going to close the dart like that. With the dart closed, I'm going to come back and cut along my seam allowance so that when I open it up, I have a perfected dart. I'll do the same thing here. I want the dart to go down. So I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to fold it along the bottom dart leg. And then I'm going to close the dart. Like that. And then I'm going to cut along my seam allowance. And I'll end up with a little perfected dart like that. Just to review all of the things that you need still, I need notches down here at the bottom of each dart leg. And on the side of each dart leg. I also need a mark, a drill mark. At full size it'd be 1/2 inch, so at this size I'll be 1/4 inch away from the dart point. I'm just going to make a little drill mark. And that's so that when we get to industry and they're going to be doing production on it, they have something to mark for the sewers. This is the completed piece. Remember all of your notches, all of your internal drill marks. Remember to mark out all of the lines that you don't need. Remember your center front, remember your grain line. And this is how you move a dart. I could move this anywhere, I could move all of it anywhere. So that's how you do it with a slash and spread method. There's one other method. So what you'll be turning in is one of these, and then you're also going to turn in the next method, which means, yeah, you're going to turn in this next method as well. Let me get my awl and I'll be right back. For the second method, we're going to start with a blank piece of paper and our bodice front. I'm going to make the exact same thing as this, except for I'm going to use a pivot method. So with the pivot method, what we do is we decide with this piece, not the paper, but our actual block, where we want to move it. So I'm going to make a teeny tiny mark right here, 1 inch down from the side seam, just so that I know where I'm going to move my dart. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my awl or a pin, just something sharp that you can stab, and I'm going to stab my bust point. This will allow me to just move my actual block wherever I want to and just rotate it. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to start tracing. And I'm going to start tracing from the inside edge of my dart leg, the one that's closer to center front. I'm going to start tracing there. I'm not going to trace the entire leg. I'm just going to start tracing the bottom. I'm going to trace across. I'm going to go up the front. I'll trace the neckline. I'll trace the shoulder. While you're tracing the shoulder, grab that notch. The armhole. While you're tracing the armhole, grab that notch. And then I'm going to trace down the side seam to where I want the dart to open up. So I have traced from here all the way around to here. I have not traced any of this yet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure, and I know that my dart is 2.5 inches. So I'm going to make a mark 1.25 inches because I want to just move half the dart. And then I'm going to take my pattern and I'm going to pivot it to that line. Once I have pivoted it to that line, so here's where it was, I'm going to pivot it to the line. I'm going to trace from where I want the dart to move, and make a little mark there, and I'm going to trace the rest of the pattern that I had yet to trace. Once I have done that, I can remove my awl, and I can take this off. Because I stabbed a hole at the bust point, I know exactly where my bust point is, and I have both dart openings. So what I can do is I can find the middle of each of my darts and draw a line to the bust point. Same thing on the side. And I'm going to back the points away from the bust point. So I'm going to go 1/2 inch away from the bust point on each of those lines. And then I can redraw in my dart legs. The pivot method is lovely because we don't end up having a ton of tape, and we end up with a really, really, really clean pattern when we're done. No extra lines that we have to cross out, because we can just come back in and erase these ones if we don't want them. And then all I need to do is add my seam allowance. Once I've added all my seam allowance, I can add in my labels like center front, my grain line, which is those 3 dots, give myself my notches. I'm going to call this number 2. I'm going to label my style the same because I'm the same person. But the style number, I'm going to make this my style number 2 because I've already done style 1 today. And then I'm going to call this dart pivot. You can call it something else just to help you remind yourself what style name this is. This is a bodice front. This is a size 8. I only need one of this. And this is pattern number 1. Now I can come back in and I can perfect my darts just like I did on the first. So I'm going to fold my front dart leg, close my dart leg, cut along my seam allowance, I've got that nice point. Perfect my side dart by folding the bottom dart leg first, folding my dart closed. Sometimes this can be annoying. Cutting my seam along my seam allowance. We'll end up cutting out the rest of it right now too. Remember all of your notches at the base of each dart. Remember your drill marks, 1/4 of an inch away from the dart point. At full size, that'd be 1/2 inch. And it's done. So when you are done with today's module, you will have completed a slash and spread method to move the dart. You also will have completed a pivot method to move the dart. The pattern is exactly the same at the end. You can see that it looks exactly the same. If I were to put them on top of each other, they line up exactly. So 2 methods to get the exact same result. So do both of them just so you have both of them in your brain. And that'll be it. This is what you're going to take a PDF of and upload for me on Canvas.